Hello, everyone. I am back. Bob is not here. I have egg on my face. I said Bob was going to be here. Bob cannot be here, but I am back here because we had some questions from last week that we need to cycle back to. So I am happy to see you again for what I think is going to be our weekly roundup. Let's call it a weekly roundup of podcast things. This is the discussion section after lecture. Lecture being the podcast for the week with our guest. Discussion section here being anything and everything that you want to cover that you would like more of, that we didn't hit there, that you feel like we need to cycle back onto, anywhere that lives in between those things. So happy to have you here with us live. Pleasure to see you. Pleasure to be with you today. Again, as always, if you're watching this on replay, happy to have you along for the replay. You can join us live on Fridays when we do these. If you are watching on replay, love to have you here too. Leave a comment down below. I cycle back through old comments. So there were lots of comments on last week's live. We're going to get into some of those. There's comments from this week's podcast. We're going to get into some of that. K. Tempest Bradford, there were some questions that you asked last week that I said I would cycle back around to. So we're going to do some housekeeping, clean things up a little bit that I didn't get to before, and then all kinds of new things. So if you are here with us live, throw in something into the chat. Happy to chat with you anywhere you want to go. If you are like, I love the lives, but I can't be there live, and are there other ways to be in touch? Yeah, Patreon's another way to be in touch. And something I want to mention, I put out a video this morning dealing with the one Joel Kramer of Expedition Bible. And Bobby Hill, I saw your comment about, we could do a lot of those. We could. There's a lot of different things that they have put out that need some response at times. This is a shorter one out of a long video. They did this long 30-minute video talking about the Amarna letters. It got sent in a little while ago to us saying, hey, have you seen this? I watched through it, knowing that this week's episode was going to be with Dr. Eric Klein, all about the Amarna letters, their new book, Love, War, and Diplomacy. I said, okay, we'll wait on that to put those two things out together so that you can say, here's a short thing. You can go over and watch Eric Klein's interview. But I am also going to do a run through of their longer thing, all 30 minutes of it. But I'm going to do that over on Patreon just for the purposes of not flooding that over here, because it's going to be, their video is 30 minutes long. The response on that's going to be really long. So that one's going to live over there. And there's room for those types of things a little bit more easily over in that space. So if you haven't seen this week's interview with Dr. Klein, I'd say go and check that one out. It's, I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite book from the year, but it's definitely one of my favorite things I've read this year. His book on this is certainly one of my favorite things that I have gone through. So one, I'd say if you're interested in more of this, look there. And he's got great notes, and he wrote it in a very approachable way. So all those things, if you liked the interview, you're going to love the book. If you're wanting more, go and check those things out. And something that came up in one of the comments, Dr. Klein was jumping into the comments on that video a little bit. Somebody was asking a question about the stuff that got left behind. Because this is something we talked about in that interview. It's something he talked about in his book. I think it's something we talked about in last week's live too regarding some of these references to the Habiru as well. We're dealing with a small collection of letters from Amarna. It's not complete. We don't have everything that had been there. Stuff got lost, stuff got destroyed. But also, what we have is what got left behind. And this is something that somebody asked in a comment. Dr. Klein responded, and Dr. Klein talks about in the book, is like, this is the stuff that got left. So there's going to be other things that maybe got moved in or housed somewhere else. So this is not a complete collection, which is always something that makes it hard when you're trying to deal with readings of these materials, if we put it that way. You're dealing with a percentage of the collection. And so we are always seeing fragments of the full picture. Anytime we're looking at these types of records, you're seeing fragments of it. You're not seeing everything because we don't have the entirety of that collection. So something to keep in mind when we're going through there. Constellation Pegasus, happy to see you. How about a video on the history of circumcision? Yes, I saw your email. I think this would be a fun one because it is an odd... We just had a talk last night from a visiting associate professor here Elizabeth Van Dyke, and she was talking about Isaiah and different things. And in there, she talked about circumcision as this mark and a sign as a part of this, and it made me remember your email saying, I think we should come back to this because this is one of those things over time that becomes very important, let's just say. An important identity marker, especially later and later as we go, where this is one of those fighting points. And people are, when we come to the Hellenistic period, right, trying to undo their circumcision and undergoing medical processes to go through that. We also have earlier, right, older depictions, right, hieroglyphic depictions from Egypt of individuals undergoing circumcision. So this isn't something that's just contained within one community. It's a broader practice that becomes a very important identity marker over time and sign of a covenant and all these things. But unpacking all of the history around that and who's participating and what does it mean, let's write that one down. I think that could be a fun start to the year, maybe. I mean, something I was thinking about doing, I need to find the right person to talk to. But while we're talking about circumcisions, one of my favorite odd facts, odd details, odd paths off of this is the holy prepuce. If you don't know what this is the relic that is Jesus's foreskin, because if Jesus was around and Jesus was circumcised, then what happened to that? Because Jesus, according to the New Testament, right, bodily ascends. He ascended into heaven. So Jesus should be gone. But there's questions then about what happened to that. And so that's a whole thing that opens up into does this exist? Did that go up too? Did it deteriorate? There are people who say that they have this, right, as a part of these relics. Yeah, K. Thomas Bradford, yeah, that is, But if you think about it in the world of relics, where there's this desire to have, right, a physical piece of individuals, there's an individual that, again, according to the text, is gone in a way that you can't have the bones of, in the way you can have the bones of apostles. And so there's lots of bones of lots of different individuals, and maybe there's too many bones, there's too many fingers for individuals. But there's one person who's supposed to have gone in a way that would prevent you from having those physical things. And so then pieces of the cross come in, or nails of the cross, there's other elements. Except what happens to the foreskin there? Because he was supposed to be, according to the practices, he was a young Jewish boy. He would be circumcised. So what happens to that? So that's a whole thing. And maybe Constellation Pegasus, if we do the history of circumcision, I think that would fit very naturally as a weird things that emerge out of this when we're talking about when we're talking about that type of topic. Jump into some other comments here. How much do you rely on when you're doing fieldwork that text on? Okay, so when you're doing fieldwork, Ravine, that touches on the New Testament, how much do we rely on texts? What's key for archaeology and what sort is left to text critics? This is something that the answer will differ. There's some books up here by De Silva talking about the archaeology of the New Testament. I think they're just out of frame. But when we're doing this, right, we have things like, if you're thinking of Paul's ministries, for example, you have these cities that he describes and places that he can go to. And famously, right, if you're looking through like a study Bible, there's going to be maps and like, oh, these are the places where Paul went. How accurate are those descriptions between and these places between? When we have these, are some of these accurate? We get elements of some of these New Testament texts that are being not travel log, like if you're thinking of genre, not fully like these travel narratives that we get from the Roman world, where you have individuals describing their process and going through, and I walk in, we have very, Pausanias writes one, this very detailed description of going to places in Greece. And this is older. When is his travel log coming from? But, sorry, do a quick Google search. He describes going to these places, and that is something that archaeologists have used. 2nd century CE, right? So, okay, so fairly contemporaneous there. He's a Greek traveler. Yes, okay, I wasn't out of my mind thinking of him. He goes through and he says, all right, I came to this place, and as I'm walking along, you see this here, and then you see this there, and so many paces past this is this. So there are those very specific types of genres that can be helpful. But what part is left to text critics is then, you shouldn't be doing that excavation with one in one hand and one in the other and trying to just prove those corroborations. But when you're excavating in places, you can find things that go, okay, this seems to make sense with some of this description that we have here because of cult practices that happen. It's something you also are going to get when you're talking about the Hebrew Bible, like both of these instances. And as we talked about last week, right? Ideally, the archaeologist is not going in to just fully prove or disprove either, which is where not having it in your hand can be the most helpful. And you say, we're gonna excavate. When you're excavating, you need both your hands so that you can excavate. And if later you're turning to say, like, how can what we found illuminate what we have in the text in ways that, does that affirm it? Does that change the perspective? Are they doing something totally different? So that's the one thing. And then the text critical aspect on top of it, I'd say can be like a whole nother turn. And I'll wrap this one up here because those are then more specific questions just dealing with the languages that don't so much tap into the concerns where archaeology might bring in, unless you're finding things like manuscripts and those pieces that can really help you there. What evidence there are that during the time of the Exodus, when it should have happened? Well, and this is a question, when do you, if you want to hold to an Exodus tradition, when should it have happened? Because you're going to be looking at some, right, and like that Expedition Bible response, looking at 14s, or are you looking at the 12s? Are you taking like a chronology, which is from the time that Solomon built and you're moving back, or are you looking to the 12s? But in either instance, if we say kind of blanket here, the Egyptian soldiers were already stationed across the Red Sea. Well, I mean, we do have. So if you're looking towards the Amarna letters, let's say as an instance, for a period of time that if you're wanting to take an early Exodus, let me read the rest of the question out here before jumping in. Were there Egyptian soldiers stationed across the Red Sea that would have created a problem for the Exodus? If you want to take an early Exodus, and you want to take Amarna as an instance that describes the role of Egypt in that region at that time, those city-states are appealing to Egypt for help, for soldiers, showing the sphere of influence that Egypt had in the region at that period of time. That is something that complicates the narrative of that group, according to the Hebrew Bible, being able to cross, go over, and then go in and conquest in this way. So what happens with those? That's something that is an archaeological piece where you'd say, okay, this is describing a broader social world and concern. It's not giving us all of this, but it does bring in materials that complicate that kind of picture. If you want to look later towards, if you're looking towards the 1200s, as let's go further down here, when you might be seeing periods of collapse and that, we don't quite have the same level of Egyptian influence in the region, which would then maybe say, this is kind of that gap where the big systems fall apart, making way for these smaller, disenfranchised groups to reestablish or establish themselves for the first time in new ways and to flourish into these spaces where the big powers have had to withdraw. And that is something we can see in the archaeological record, that there are new movements of people and movements from the hill country down towards new lowland regions. You see that in the settlement patterns. Who exactly that is more complicated because it's not just one individual group. There's varieties that are participating in this, which is something where individuals will say, okay, maybe it's out of this memory, out of the context of these events, that these narratives take place later on as we go. Way behind on chat here, so let's jump through some of these. Yes, happy Friday. Happy to see you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. Yes, please leave a question, leave a comment. Happy to jump through. I've got some backlog things to get to as well. There's a thing, yes, so the Reed Sea, not the Red Sea. So this is like, we're talking about if you want to go in, this is Yam Suf, Sea of Reeds. Now it becomes the Red Sea in the Septuagint, out of an attempt, some scholars think, to tie this in to this type of historiographic writing where this is a known place, and so that translation, is it a mistake? This is always something you have to think about when you're reading the Septuagint and there's a change. Is it an intentional change? That's possible. Is it that they didn't understand their word? That's also possible. Because there are instances where it seems like those Septuagint translators are making changes on purpose to say we are reinterpreting this in a new way. Other times it seems like they're trying to reach for what they know contextually, or maybe, especially if it's these words that don't appear very frequently, or if they're trying to think geographically, that they might reach for other solutions to try to come to that place. So yeah, the Red Sea, not the Red Sea, it's the Sea of Reeds that becomes one of these things. And that is a difficulty then when you're saying, well, what place would this have been in the first place? Why do people think about Jesus' foreskin is a great question. But it's just one of those. It's an old, Red Sea is a surprisingly old mistranslation. It's something that does show up. Yeah, you have those types of things where it holds in, like in the mind, that's the name that everybody has, and it's the name that goes in there. But if you're looking at the texts, that's going to be one of those places where you have things that, a fun place. Where is that the biggest quibble in the world for everyone? No. But it's a place where that interpretive tradition and the translation opens place to say, okay, how does a text critical approach change the way we're reading these things? Does that influence how we're seeing other things? Or is this just signs of internal change over time and how things go through? How relics aren't really... Yeah, so when we're talking about relics, the relics weren't really a thing in Second Temple Judaism, so why would anyone around Jesus have kept certain things like the spear or the Holy Grail? Well, so this is a place where when would they have been keeping these things? Did they, or is everything that is a claimed relic later and transposed back because would they have had any of these elements at the time? Or is this a space where the early community held on to these things because they are similar but also different from the groups in which they are around, and these items hold a special privilege or esteem to them as not cult items, but things that are connected to specific interpretations and rituals that you have taken place or participated in. Why would they have kept his foreskin though? Yeah, why would they have kept that? That's not something. So that's one of those places where you're like, would that have been a thing? But out of that desire to still have something physical, that's why it opens a door for people to say, bodily can't be here, but what about this thing? What about this thing opens up a different way? Vidmaster, give a rundown of the reasons why there's an early and late dating for those that theorize a historical exodus. Okay, yes, and thank you so much for the support, and this ties into what we had talked about before. So let's say I want to pull up here the verse for you in particular, because we have, a variety of dates. The old date for the Exodus, the early Exodus, let's say, the early Exodus date is the one that sits in the 1400s. So this is that mid-15th century BCE date. And this comes to us from 1 Kings 6:1. In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, which is the second month, the month of Ziv, which is the second month, he began to build the house of the Lord. So this early Exodus date is built on this biblical chronology that says we're going to turn to 1 Kings and establish a date for the construction of Solomon's temple, and then move backward according to this math to say we're going to move back and we're going to move back and we're going to have these elements. Now, the later date for this is the 13th century, so the 1200s BCE. And this emerges out of not looking towards that biblical chronology, but turning towards the archaeological and social world that could give rise to this. Because if we're looking towards that period of time, that aligns more with something like the Merneptah Stele, which talks about, the seed of Israel is laid waste. And so that contextually, archaeologically gives a reference here. Now, debates on what does that mean, but it's that name. The reference to this name and saying, okay, this gives a different anchor point. Now, people will say we should bridge those two and say they need to get out at an earlier date to be around and be established, then be attacked at a later, and people will path those things together. But looking towards the destruction that's present at some of those city-states in the region, looking towards things like that Merneptah Stele date, that is something that leans towards that later Exodus date. Both of these dates, though, have their problems archaeologically. Both of them rely on, I'd say again, I love the interview with Dr. Dessel, the theories of origins, because it's a helpful way to think through, you do have these outsider models, right? There's outsider models and there's insider models that deal with these different types of dates and deal with them in different ways. The outsider models are things like those who want to hold to an Exodus as seen in the Bible. A group from somewhere else comes in, and then depending on what date and what you want to connect it to, how are they emerging, how do we see them? Or insider models to say, no, they are emerging out of the social groups that are there. that in light of things like the late Bronze Age collapse, the collapse of these city-state systems, are able to reassemble themselves in new and creative ways in response to their communities. So some of the reasons why, the primary reason why the early is because you are seeking to prove a biblical description, and then you need to abide by that biblical chronology. So that's going to be the more literalist reading that says, I have this date, I need to abide by that date. That's going to give me an early date, and then how do I align this? And there can be changes that happens with, like, how are you reading Pharaoh's rules and those types of things. The later date is turning away from that and saying they're giving a chronology there in Kings that is in line with the way the Bible does those types of chronologies in other places, which is not necessarily factual, but for a different purpose, maybe symbolic in meaning for some of these numbers. And so instead, we're going to turn towards still wanting to prove an Exodus, but looking to things like the Merneptah Stele to say, how does that happen? But again, in all those instances, there's complications trying to show that that could happen with either of those models or in any reality at all. But through all of that, I'd say, and we talked about this with Dr. Dessel, go and check that one out, and something that we talk about some in that recent Habiru video, there is something in these fluctuations, in the emergence that happens at this time, that gives the ground for which you can see, okay, how do people emerge in a new way at this period of time? And are there connections between those types of things? There are people that move out from that to say, okay, maybe. And they're adapting the destruction that they see of these cities, or they are adapting these memories of these types of disenfranchised social bands. And maybe they participated in them in some ways, maybe they didn't, maybe they just have the memory of them, and that makes its way into the text. There does seem to be some tradition of relics and simple. There is some, like there's always a tradition of some relics. I mean, think of things like all of the temple implements. What makes that a relic or not? Think of something like the Nehushtan, let's say. If you're reading through your Hebrew Bible, right, Moses makes this Nehushtan when the serpents are sent to go and kill the Israelites because of their disobedience. The snake that goes on, hold it up, look at this thing. We are then told later that that is present in the temple and has to be removed as a part of these cultic reforms. That is, in a way, right, a relic, but of a different nature. And so are we looking at things that are very individualized, tied to a specific person, or are we looking at things that are more systematic, cult-wide, a part of that religious practice? What becomes the relic? What becomes more individual? As we move more and more, there becomes different ties in different periods of time to that hyper-specific person. You can see similar things, though, in non-religious contexts. Think of Alexander the Great. And there are all of these items that are said to have been connected to Alexander the Great because those are relics. So we still have that type of thing in non-religious spaces through these periods of times as well. People want a thing. If you can have a thing that person touched, who you hold in high regard, that can be valuable to you, whether it is of a religious nature, historic nature, because of your individual identity and your connection with them. There's a variety of ways that those things can be connected over time. Come through. The Septuagint has always been the Septuagint. I mean, I love the Septuagint. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit behind in your conversation. I will catch up here quickly. I love the Septuagint because it is fun, and it doesn't always get everything perfect, but that's part of what makes it fun. And I'd also say it doesn't get everything perfect, but that doesn't mean that it also gets everything wrong, because you have these debates where when there's differences between the text, who are you giving priority to? If you always just give priority to the preserved Masoretic text and say the Septuagint is wrong, what do we do if we find texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls that maybe indicate what the Septuagint has is echoed, and what the Masoretic text preserves is different? Does that mean that that is wrong? And so you get these kind of like communities, these families of texts, an individual that you should look at as Emmanuel Tov for discussions of these texts, especially with the Dead Sea Scrolls, but how you turn to text criticism and something that can be baked in to say, like, well, this reading should always be preferred. That can present things where you're going to push something aside. It can help show community practice. Okay, so let me come through. People don't polemicize against behaviors that are not actually happening. If someone is railing against a thing, it's a pretty good sign that people are doing that thing. Yeah, when we have these discussions, I mean, think of it in the Hebrew Bible context, because it's my favorite place, is, hello, Becca, Great to see you. When you think of these things in my favorite context, the Hebrew Bible, when you have it saying, don't worship other gods, don't make idols, don't worship other gods, don't make idols, why are they doing that? It's not because nobody's doing it. It's because somebody is absolutely doing that. If you're telling them over and over again, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, people are doing that. And so when you have these types of condemnations against things, yeah, they're an indication that something is taking place. Now, does that mean it's exactly as it looks in the text? No. That might be an overly polemicized version of what they were doing to overemphasize and to show a certain view of this while also protecting other areas that might be okay with this. I think of, there's a story in Jeremiah. Let me Google real quick your reference, because it's going to be, it's the cakes for the Queen of Heaven. I want to say it's Jeremiah 7 and Jeremiah 33, where we have, I should remember this because this was a part of my master's thesis. Yeah, Jeremiah 7, Jeremiah 44. I knew it was the same numbers, but 44, 17 through 19, Jeremiah 7, 8, where you get these references to women who are baking these cakes for the Queen of Heaven that they are called, and Jeremiah condemning them to say, you should not be doing these things. Jeremiah 7:18, let's back up to 7:17. Do you not see what they are doing in the towns of Judah, the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, the fathers kindle a fire, the women knead the dough. To make cakes for the Queen of Heaven, they pour out drink offerings to other gods to provoke me to anger. And then if we jump to Jeremiah 44, also 17, right? They reply, we're not going to listen to you. Verse 16, as for the word that you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we are not going to listen to you, namely, to stop doing these things, to stop making these cakes. We're not going to listen to that. Instead, we will do everything that we have vowed, make offerings to the Queen of Heaven, pour out libations to her, just as we, our ancestors, our kings, our officials used to do in the towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem. We used to have plenty of food and prospered and saw no misfortune. But from the time we stopped, everything has perished by the sword. And so they say, we're going to continue doing these things, and Jeremiah goes on his way. So I bring this up because you're talking about the stop doing this. The stop doing this, in this case, Jeremiah 7, hey, they're making these things, tell them to stop. They then, interestingly, in Jeremiah 44, get to reply, and they say, yeah, we are doing that. We're absolutely doing that, and you can get lost because we're going to keep doing it. So in one of these instances where this kind of condemnation, yes, should show us that something is happening, this type of practice is taking place. But still within that, exactly what does this mean? The cakes for the Queen of Heaven. What type of cakes is this? Who is the Queen of Heaven? Are these molded cakes? Are these Ishtar cakes? Are these cakes that are made in a mold to look like an individual? Are they marked with the sign? Are they consumed in some ways? K. Tempest Bradford, right? Your question of what are the libation offerings that are poured out, right? What is this practice? Does this get connected to beer and bread in ancient Mesopotamia? And the ties with deities, goddesses in that context, and beer and bread so intimately tied? Is this just about household production? Is this about the making of food and ritual being passed on through the hands of the matriarchs of the house? So lots of these ways that questions can still emerge out of these things, but the condemnation shows us that, yeah, something is taking place, something is happening in these ways. Krish, question about the Bible does like 400 years. It absolutely does. And spans of time like 40 days and 40 nights. Yes. Is it? It's like how we'd say 1,000,000 years ago. It's not meant to be literal. Yes, so there are these, well, let's say yes and. There are these figurative symbolic numbers, these numbers of wholeness, right? If you're thinking of things like 40, yeah. Also, if you turn towards your flood narrative, how long does it rain? Well, read and you're going to get different answers. But 40, 400, 12, 7, there's these numbers of meaning, completion, and wholeness that give you something other than just a strict period of time. Because if you look back through your text, or join us for the bonus podcast, and we can do this together. You can join the bonus podcast over on Patreon. You can also get it over here on YouTube. But if you join us on Patreon, you also get early access to ad-free video podcasts, bonus stuff, all kinds of things. But happy to have you either place. These types of chronologies sometimes are trying to give us a sense of time. Look towards something like the book of Ezra, or Chronicles. These genealogies are doing something specific, both symbolically, but also not maybe fully literally, but trying to move in a different way than something earlier when you talk about these numbers. So the numbers or not a one-size-fits-all. Does it always mean just something symbolic? A lot of times it does, but to say it must always and it can only be that is also to limit it in ways that it hinders it from doing things that it might want to be doing in other instances. So let's say video on you. Yeah, so my favorite reading for Exodus, right? If we're talking about Exodus, if you want to pin me down, if you're pushing me into a corner to say, what do you think happened with the Exodus? I'm a big fan of cultural memory in a wide variety of ways. There's a lot of people who, will raise quibbles with using this phrase of cultural memory as a kind of a get out of jail free card, because some people use it that way to say like, oh, why is this in the text? Oh, it's a cultural memory of something that happened, and you can just like escape any argument. I don't think it's fair to use it in that way, but I do like it in the instance where we have these types of stories, these narratives, especially identity stories, that seem to be showing remembrances of things that we can find some parts for, but other parts are very personalized to them. And especially if you get these types of parallels across. Cultural memory can be one of these things that can help us, I think, start to reframe the questions that we ask about it. It's not something that can provide you the immediate solution. But if you can then turn to texts, especially a multiplicity of texts, not just within one tradition, but can we turn towards external sources as well? Can we turn towards archaeology to help us see what might be practicing through this? So if I turn back to the cakes for the Queen of Heaven, because that's something that I looked at before, we have a text, Jeremiah, talking about this. We also have archaeological evidence for these types of cake-making processes in broader cultures. We get descriptions and visualizations of this type of matriarchal bread making, especially through like tomb models. So can we build a case that looks across multiple ways, anthropologically, archaeologically, textually, to say, how can we understand this and what kind of memory might be preserved in this flourish? So if you can turn to something like the Exodus as well, is it drawing on a memory of system collapse, a memory of migration, or migrations plural, of people being able to establish themselves in new ways, of people banding together in new systems and new functions, forming new identities out of ways that have collapsed? Then can we see things for that? It doesn't mean that it has to confirm what you have in the text, but it also doesn't mean that everything you can see in the text has no grounding. It might say, well, okay, this is their presented memory of some of these other aspects, and then we can move through something in between in those ways. In the Desert Brass, thought on who Moses's Cushite wife is. I mean, Becca, thank you for the support. Yeah, so the identity of Moses's wife, and who is she and where is she, and further debates that grow out of this. Moses's wife is an interesting character through the whole text, because when she's around, right? If you look at something like Zipporah at the end, if you're going back when she apparently saves Moses' life in the book of Exodus by circumcising somebody and touching that to someone. Again, circumcision came up today. What's the deal with this? And does something there. We get something else in a very fun text that is one of my new favorites, Numbers 25, because I spent a lot of time working on this dissertation-wise. But when we have this instance with Baal Peor, and they're at the tent of meeting, and they brought a Midianite woman into his family in verse 6. There are some that want to read this as Moses' wife in a way that we have these types of overlapping concerns, because her identity, when she's there, when she's not there, like in the book of Exodus, when her father-in-law brings her and takes her, and you have these back and forths, it's not super concerned. The text is not super concerned with fleshing out her story, her identity, or her continuity in a way that's not totally surprising, because it's focused on Moses, and it doesn't see her as essential to that. She also presents potential problems because of the ties that she brings into the narrative and later identity concerns that are going to happen emerging out of that, something that some later communities use, right? If you're looking at, well, why should we privilege someone else instead of Moses, or is Moses always as esteemed as we think of him as? That wife identity is something that brings in some of those parts into question. You're scrolling through some of your comments. Yes, thank you. If you have questions, throw them in. I can't get to everything because I do have some things I need to cycle back to as well, but let me see. Yeah, lots of good stuff for Cakes for the Queen of Heaven. It's a really fun story. There's a wonderful book It's called Under Every Green Tree by Susan Ackerman. It's a published version of her PhD dissertation. And she's got a good section in there on the cakes for the Queen of Heaven that I'd highly recommend. I'd also recommend the work of Carol Myers if you're looking for more on theories of food production, and the implications of that, much having to do with bread. I'd also say Nathan McDonald if you're interested in looking at just food-related stuff. One of these essential things. Cynthia Schaefer-Elliott if you're looking for food-related stuff. Good friend of the show. Love you, Cynthia. That you could go out in ways that bring in these types of things that are so essential to being alive, but that the food gets so overlooked. And we get these little instances where suddenly somebody is making food. And then what can we do with that? And what can archaeologists use that if we're finding things like oven installations? Can we turn to the text in a helpful way to help us understand what's at these ovens, or not so much? Do those make something totally different for us? Coming through some of this. I have not watched the Promised Land series. I have seen pieces from it, but I have not. I've seen pieces in passing on social media. I have not watched it. Let me say, let's put it down on the take a glance and see what it looks like. But we think that part is still referring to Zipporah. So Becca, your question, we're still referring to Zipporah in Numbers 25. I guess is that your question? I guess. Sorry, getting out of sync with the comments here when we're talking about who exactly. I don't think it is, right? And part of why I don't think it is because we have her named in verse 14. The name of the slain Israelite man who was killed was Zimri, and the name of the Midianite woman was Cosbi. So we get an identity there for her. But there are others in reading this text, because this text, I think, is highly fragmented and brought together over various periods of time, that propose different phases of construction for the text, let's call it, and that it might have been an attack on Moses because of the presence of Moses in the congregation at the tent of meeting and the way there's a conflict of power here and Moses does nothing. Why would Moses not react in this way? Well, maybe because it's connected to his wife. So there's the reading for some that could open up that interpretation. I think that for me doesn't totally check out. Now, the naming section, right, I do think is later. When those names get brought in, I don't think that's original. Let's not call it original. That's not the earliest cores of those texts. As that text gets expanded over time, those types of impositions where names being brought in and the genealogies of who is connected to who, which what we get in 14 through 15, which sets up very explicitly what we get in 16 to 18 to set up the Midianite war, that those things are serving other purposes, and so the tacking on of the name there is later, I think. Now, that could be also the move of a later community to say we are uncomfortable with the possibility that you are reading what you have up above in verse 6 when they bring a Midianite woman into his family in the sight of Moses. Who is she? There she's not named. And we have also in a move in verse 1 through 5 where they're the Moabites, and then in verse 6, suddenly they shift to the Midianites, a change in sources. Not to go the whole dissertation rabbit hole for you, but JE materials is what most people see 1 through 5, dealing with a different type of concern with Moab. And then once we start in 6 through 9 being this phase that has to do with the Phinehas killing of these individuals, this ritual killing, where it moves to the Midianites. But in this, that opens the door as an unnamed Midianite woman, a connection by presence to Moses and tent of meeting. Is this a challenge to his authority by unnamed Israelite man who gets named later? And then who might be the name that jumps into your mind? Okay, well, this must be Moses' wife. And then those later things are coming in to try to make sure to push you away from that. Whereas if you're just reading it as a monolithic whole, to say Numbers 25 plopped down onto the page like this, then you say, well, no, look over here, and she's got a name. And she does, but it may not be that name before. But I don't think that it's not impossible, let's say, but for me, it's not my reading of it. I'm focused more on Phinehas when we go through those types of things, in a shock to all. Yes, Jake W, I should say. Yes, he has some humorous videos and readings of things when we go through. There are many names. I'm not convinced that the name Moses can be said to be specifically Egyptian. Yeah, you do have so like this to draw out an Egyptian connections with Moshe as these names. We do have, especially within the Levites, right, Egyptian connections with Levite names, which when people are looking at these things, somehow we're cycling all around the Exodus today. It's what's in your mind. It's fine. It's in my mind. Now, when we're looking at these Levite names, this is one of those places where people say, okay, so does this corroborate this type of Egyptian naming within this community? The evidence, is this evidence for an Exodus? Or there are individuals who will say, well, maybe the Levites are a community that had a story of emerging out of this, and their names bear evidence by having Egyptian influence that they had been in that place and have moved here. There will be people who look towards Hyksos as, okay, is this a way that these things could be connected? Lots of different positions all the way through, but for the name itself can be said to be specifically Egyptian. You do have ties there where you have these types of connections within these things. But how far those things get pushed, let's say, how much gets leveraged onto the potential connection of a name can really outweigh how much that connection can hold up. Maybe we put it that way, right? Sometimes that name, the proposed etymological connection of a name, can be used in a way that it can't really sustain. And suddenly things get built up and built up and built up over time. And I'm not just thinking about the Habiru video that we just made, but I am also thinking about that, where you have a proposed connection and then lots of things get leveraged on top. And over time, when that changes, or when new contexts come in to say, oh, well, maybe we could also look towards several potential connections for this. Or, well, we had looked one direction because we were focused on a specific period of time. I'm thinking here too, while we're talking about Exodus, in Exodus 26, the outermost covering for the tabernacle is of a certain kind of leather that the Hebrew for it is odd, and the texts don't really know what to do. And so some things, the JPS translation puts it as porpoise skin because there's a possible connection to, or dolphin skin, possible connection to the Arabic word for porpoise or dolphin. But if you turn towards Akkadian, then it can be yellow tanned. And so which way do you want to look for connections? When are you seeing this text emerging? What types of concerns might it have latent within that? And it can lead toward different ways. And yeah, this false etymologies, the Torah's etymology is a false etymology put back on. That Moses is not the only Egyptian name. Yeah, there's a bunch of Levite names that are Egyptian. And so we do got a lot of these created etymologies where individuals think of the naming of the sons that become the tribes. They all have a story, and especially go through Leah, where it's, another's been added to me, and Joseph, right? It goes from son of suffering to son of my right hand, right? So you have these movements where the story is trying to make something happen with these names. Does that mean the name always meant that? Or is it creating these, and as it is doing this, creating these new systems of interpretation where it's building these out in a way that may not reflect all of that? And we have, you have things that can move one way or another, which is where it gets so hard sometimes to, not to have conversations, but when someone wants to build too much onto it, to say like, well, it's not doing that. But at times you also have to acknowledge that, okay, well, there are instances where there could be these types of connections. Which came first? The chicken or the egg, right? Esau's name. Is it, he's red and hairy, and so he's named this. And then we get a connection to Edom. And does that go because of the connection that gets Esau and Esau's descendants as the Edomites and pushed back forward and move that way out of time, or moving the other way out of time? Those are places where people will debate, and it's not always the same. Again, not the same for every instance, for every period of time. Yeah, it's almost like vowel sounds are important into how word sounds and what words mean. Because if you have the same word that could be several things, especially with drop letters, when letters might be coming out depending on the form that it takes in the Hebrew, and you might have a multiplicity of options, and voweling can be very significant there. And then thinking through, how is that preserved over time? Where might human error enter the picture when translation takes place? All of those things, are important for how we have to do these things. So yes, Tutmosis, yeah, and so like the son of, instead of like, yeah, he drew out, because let's say, okay, so let's go here to, if we're to K. Tempest Bradford, cycling back to your question about, right, the naming of Moses. So we have in Exodus 2, she bears a son, she can't hide him any longer, she puts him in a papyrus basket, verse 3. Then 5, Pharaoh's daughter goes down, she sees him, she takes him out, and she says, like, get a nurse, yes. Verse 10, she took him out, she named him Moses. And because she said, I drew him out of the water. So Moshe as his name there, I drew him out as your verbal action that is connected to the naming of him. And so he is not, he's named there by Pharaoh's daughter, which then is going to align with the narrative of him being raised in the court. And so exactly how is that then tied into, you have a specific reading there for you from the Hebrew text as to draw out, to say this is the one who is drawn out of the water, but he's also going to be the one that draws us out of Egypt, right? So you have his specific naming event, the drawing out, and you also have a symbolic foreshadowing of what he's going to help participate in the drawing out of those people. And so from his birth, you have something about this individual. You also have ties in his origin story here about this ruler who is floating upon the waters, that is drawn up out of the basket in a way that marks him as a unique individual, much like the narrative that we get of Sargon, who is placed into a reed basket onto a river and is found and brought out. So you have this birth narrative for him that is not totally unique to him, but that marks him as someone who is distinct. And then the name can move many ways out of that. Esau would have been red. Esau would be his bowl and red. Yes, and it's like this red stuff, like give me the soup. I've got an episode with Cynthia where we talk all about Jacob and Esau and the food that's happening in there. We can allow the text to be weird and we can wrestle with it. Yes. We can allow the text to be weird and wrestle with it. Becca, I completely agree. And I'm going to leave it there because I think that's a wonderful, happy note to say we can have a weird text. We can wrestle with the text. Oh, well, no, I'm not going to leave it there because I have a follow-up question for you, K. Tempest Bradford, from last week regarding the connection between Therapeutae and the Elephantine community, which I said I would look at and come back to. And last time I had said, we've got difficulties in trying to pair these things together, these communities together, and people will propose connections sometimes because of geographic similarities in regions. And that's one that's happening here because the Therapeutae community, I didn't want to speak out of line last time, and I was like, let me double check my dates, and I was not wrong. So when we're talking about the Elephantine community, for the materials that we have, looking at that like conversation with Dr. Moore, you have those materials mostly 5th to 4th century BCE. Therapeutae we know of from Philo. Philo, who writes about them, let's say, in his On the Contemplative Life. And they are a 1st century CE community. And so he describes them as this like aesthetic community that is not the Essenes, but not the Essenes, but you can see similarities in the way they practice, the way they withdraw, the way they hold certain Sabbath observances of this type of lifestyle and concern within some of these sectarian communities of that period of time. But you have a large chronological gap. Now, it wouldn't shock me if some people said, okay, well, there was a community here at Elephantine that then leaves and goes, they move. Do they relocate over here? But what we don't have between those types of communities across that period of time is that same type of ritual concern. It doesn't mean that a ritual concern can't emerge over time, but we don't have those types of practices that get attributed to this group at Therapeutae by Philo within the materials that we have from the community at Elephantine themselves. And so I don't know of someone who's saying like, yes, these things must be connected together. They need to be connected together. They are both, right, Jewish communities within the Egyptian sphere. But chronologically, they're not existing at a time that allows for that kind of overlap. They don't have those same types of concerns regarding what we have described either by themselves in the material records that we have, though again, it's from what we have preserved, or from Philo in talking about them. But when you have those types of descriptions by somebody like Philo, right, you have that external description. If you're looking at something like Josephus, where he's talking about sectarian communities, how much can we take like his description of what the Essenes are doing compared and hold that at face value? How much does he really know? That's always a difficulty when you get these reports from other individuals. Esoterica, great place to go and look. Yeah, they do have ideologies. This is a part of some of the waters that are emerging within these communities in the 1st century CE, that these types of communities have similar concerns, similar practices that they're engaging in when dealing with the way they think of themselves, their world. You can see philosophical influences in this emerging from their reading of their texts, but also from Greek philosophical schools, moving in different ways, those concerns for afterlife or their concerns with ritual purity, how ritual purity can distinguish between these communities in very important ways, and arguments over little things like does pouring from a pure to an impure vessel, is the impurity contagious? Can it travel up the stream of water or not? You get debates and differences in there. So happy to cycle back around to those. And let's say we'll leave that one there. Again, apologies, Bob's not available today, but I am happy to hang out with you as we can. And I didn't cycle around to anything, discussion section E from this week's with Eric Klein. I hope that means that one was so clear and that interview, his answers were great, but that you didn't have any questions from that one. And so if you do, you could throw something in now. I see some things about Akhenaten and regarding his monotheism, how forceful he was. Is he monotheistic at all? We have an interview with Dr. Kara Cooney talking about Akhenaten. I'd say go and check that one out. And regarding what he means, how he's thinking about himself, his representations of himself as well. And I think something that I'll want to do in the future, we have an interview coming out with an Egyptologist, Campbell Price, about a book that they have coming out. But I think it'd be fun to have him come on because he could talk more about some of these depictions that Akhenaten has and the way he's using art to bring out a message in another way. Yeah, happy to have you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Kane Tempest Bradford. Pleasure to chat. Pleasure to be around with you. I know you like Bob too, but happy to hang out with you. Pleasure to be here on a Friday with you. Again, if you're looking for more from us, we got tons of stuff over on our YouTube channel, lots of videos, lots of podcasts to check out outside of just this week's. We got the bonus episodes there, the weekly bonus podcast. We got more of that over on Patreon, however you want to be around. But also, if you just want to jump in on lives, we won't have a live next Friday because we'll be at a conference. I'll be at a conference next Friday, and so I won't be here for that live. But we'll be coming back into lives after that, after Thanksgiving. So there will be a little bit of a break, conference schedule, and then Thanksgiving, I will be with family. So then let's say like beginning of December, I think will probably be the one, unless we jump on like a weekend something. And something I need to do is do that watch through of the full Expedition Bible video. That one will be going over on Patreon if you are interested. I think it'll come out next week. I'll be going to SBL. I'll be jumping in a plane. Bob and I will be going out to SBL, the Society of Biblical Literature, to go and hear some wonderful presentations, talk to some people about different things, all kinds of Bible. And right before it, ASOR is also in Boston this year, so there will be a lot of archaeologists around. We'll do some chat, talk to some people, get some things set up for you coming your way for interviews in 2026. We've got some fun stuff coming your way in December, Christmas-related and broader. So not just one thing. We're going to have a mix. It doesn't all have to be Christmas leading into December, but you will get some Christmas. If you are there, I will be there. If you see me, come and say hi. I have to say, I haven't looked at the program guide very detailed yet, so I don't know what sessions I will be going to. But if you are at SBL and you see me, come and say hi. Love to say hi and chit-chat in person. It'd be great. Hopefully I run into you there. But for this week, again, the fifth sign-off for the day, I'm going to leave this one here. Do I have a list of books by previous guests outside of the episode descriptions? I mean, you are in my mind, because this week I was thinking to myself, I haven't done that. I don't have that in one convenient place other than going through the episode descriptions, but I need to. So we are going to be making one of those. And then I need to find the best place to put it, whether it should go, should it live like in our link tree? Should it, in the way that can be easily updated, and a good reference for people. Like, is the link tree a nice home for you? Do you want it somewhere on YouTube? Do you want that over on our website? If you have an idea about a place that you think would be most convenient, let me know. I'm going to do kind of like a full roundup at the end of the year of here's all the books that we've gone through this year, because there's been a lot. Very happy to say it's been a great year for reading. Good books, and I'm going to do kind of a recommendation list here in December of the ones I'd say buy for yourself, the ones maybe buy for some others who might be interested. Some of them I think you probably exactly expect, and some of them might be a little bit of a surprise for you, because I also have a stack of things I need to be getting through here for the end of the year. But if you have a feeling on where a book list might be most helpful to you, and let me also say, if you're interested in book list videos, because we can't always do an interview for everybody, and sometimes, we'll include things in newsletters, we'll include things in descriptions, but if there's ways that, you'd like to say, hey, kind of video breakthroughs, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, let me know. We can figure out ways that work through the website. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I might do like a 1-2 and link it to build it into the website as kind of that first base of, like reading list somewhere there. And then just include a direct link in our link tree that says, like everybody we've talked to, the book recommendations from this year. You can do affiliate links if that helps and allowed. Yeah, so that's something we're looking towards in 2026. We're just kind of doing the general, right now I'm pushing to publisher pages whenever possible, but we might be moving that way in the future. We will see. As of now, links are not affiliate links unless they're disclosed as such when we might be doing affiliate partnerships with things. But right now, book recommendation links, they're going to publisher when I can, Amazon at a default if we have to. Okay. I will leave that one there. That'll be the end. Yes, book list. Let's say we need a book list place on the website, but I will actually leave you now. So thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your support and your chat. It is always great to see you. I hope you have a wonderful week and weekend. Have a great Thanksgiving. I will see you after Thanksgiving, and we'll have episodes that are coming out. The podcast will continue coming out in between, but we'll be back for a live after that. But for today, for all of us here at Bible and Archaeology, until next time.